Revolutionary Socialist Party is to help to promote the development of a mass movement that can overcome these obstacles, these profound obstacles to working class self-emancipation, and can help such a movement develop which focuses on the problem of power. Now, it's very unfashionable to talk about power these days. Power is supposed to be something evil that we should not sully our hands with. There's quite an influential book that is called Change the World Without Taking Power. I think that kind of attitude is an evasion, because given the enormous concentrations of power that maintain and continually reproduce the existing capitalist society with all its exploitation and oppression, anyone who really wants to change the world, who really wants to get rid of the existing order, has to address the question of power. But it's very important to be clear what's meant here by talking about conquering power or taking power. We in the revolutionary Marxist tradition, and I would argue Lenin himself and the Bolsheviks in their practice as revolutionaries in Russia, up to in the process that led up to the October Revolution of 1917, we in the revolutionary Marxist tradition don't seek the seizure of power by a particular party, not by ourselves in particular. Simply the seizure of power, the seizure of the state by a political party, however committed its members, however radical its program, would in the end simply reproduce the existing hierarchy of domination and exploitation. By the conquest of power, by taking power, we mean something radically different. We mean the development of workers' councils, the working class self-organised, spreading networks of workers' councils across countries, indeed across the world ultimately, that take power, wrest power away from the corporations of the state and take over the running of society, create a radically democratic, self-managed society on ultimately a global scale. The role of a revolutionary Marxist party in the Leninist tradition that I'm defending this evening is not to substitute itself for this council democracy, but help to knit together the different struggles in a focused struggle for power. But precisely because, as I've argued, because of the way in which capitalist society is organised to prevent people from collectively acting fundamentally to transform that society, a revolutionary party has to be prepared to intervene and help shape these struggles. And it's perhaps particularly that practice of intervention by organised revolutionaries that is critical to any understanding of Leninism. And when I say we need Leninism today, that's what I mean. Let's look, to bring that out, let's look at the contemporary anti-capitalist and anti-war movements. Very, very powerful, impressive, and dynamic movements. But movements that are characterised by an immense degree of ideological diversity that is one of the most attractive quality of those movements, their inclusivity. But what that ideological diversity means that within the movement there are a variety of different strategies and visions of the alternative that are mutually inconsistent. One can see, for example, a broad current within the anti-capitalist movement that is basically reformist, that sees its aim of simply regulating capitalism to make it function more humanely and somewhat more accountably than it does at present. You have the so-called autonomist tendencies who, in different ways, see the development of different kinds of self-organisation within the existing society as the beginnings of a new society, and very resistant to more centralised and coordinated movements. And then you have socialists within the movement, parties like the Socialist Workers' Party, Rifondazione Comunista in Italy, the Revolutionary Communist League in France. Now, those broad currents, the reformists, the autonomists, the socialists, are in effect different broad parties, even though parties aren't supposed to exist within the anti-capitalist movement. In effect, we have different programs, different strategies, different visions of change that compete with each other. And that leads to the clash between these different parties profoundly affect the development of the movement. The reformist wing of the movement were deeply resistant to developing the initial anti-capitalist movement into an anti-war movement as well. If they had had their way, there wouldn't have been a 15th of February 2003. There wouldn't have been the massive demonstrations against the war in Iraq, which came out of essentially the European Social Forum in Florence and the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre. So, the coexistence of these different programs, visions, strategies, in one sense, is a sign of the strength of the movement. It's very attractive that it's got scope for such different views, that it is so genuinely inclusive. But simply the coexistence of these different views could paralyse the movement and prevent it from realising its potential. What revolutionary socialists, when they intervene actively inside the movement, are trying to ensure that the movement isn't paralysed and that it moves forward in a way that makes it more effective, more closer to the ultimate goal, not simply of defeating particular initiatives of our rulers, but getting rid of the system itself. And we do so by engaging in the battle of ideas, particularly against reformist ideas, trying to make the left more cohesive inside the movement, and more broadly, trying to shape the movement. What we call democratic centralism, which is the way in which we organise ourselves internally, is simply a device, ultimately based upon the majority principle, in other words, the principle that decisions are taken by majority vote and are binding in all who participate in the discussion and the decisions. All it is a device that to allow revolutionary socialists to discuss how well we've done in the particular struggles we intervene in, and to hammer out a concerted approach to intervene more effectively in the future. Now, when we talk about shaping the movement and organising to intervene to shaping the movement, we are accused of being authoritarian. But it seems to me that that kind of accusation is incredibly hypocritical. The reformist right wing of the anti-capitalist movement tried to shape the movement. They tried very vigorously to divert it from developing into a movement against the war. The autonomous wing of the movement tries to shape the movement in various ways. They try to insist that people accept and operate within the framework only of their ways of organising and deny any other people's ways of organising as legitimate as far as the movement is concerned. Why is it wrong only for revolutionary socialists to try to shape the movement? We see no contradiction between organising this way and the kind of vision that I briefly alluded to of revolution as self-emancipation. On the contrary, precisely because of the fragmenting, diffusing and dividing effects of capitalist society, we don't believe this vision will become reality without the organised intervention of revolutionary socialists. Now, very briefly, in conclusion, I want to return to history, because people ask, doesn't the experience of the Russian Revolution show that, after all, there is a contradiction between our way of organising and self-emancipation? What the experience of the Russian Revolution certainly shows that what was, I would argue, an authentically democratic, revolutionary mass workers' party can be transformed into something horrible, into an obscene parody of what it once had been. Michael has various sociological arguments designed to prove that this must necessarily be happening. He has an argument that he'll put forward that Leninist organisations are a vehicle of what he calls the coordinator class. I don't have time to discuss his sociology, except to say I think he lumps together quite heterogeneous groups of employees who are all in different ways intermediate between labour and capital, but who aren't the same in other ways. What I want to say rather is that the terrible corruption of the Bolshevik Party is not inherent in the Lenin